After 18 months of driving for Lyft in Los Angeles, Carmen Reyes thought she'd developed a sixth sense for dangerous passengers, the ones who radiated aggression in their posture, the ones who asked too many questions about whether she was driving alone, the ones whose pickup locations were in neighborhoods where even the police hesitated to go after dark. But none of her instincts warned her about the man who requested a ride from Echo Park on the night of October 23rd. It was a Tuesday that had been so ordinary in every other way, she would later struggle to reconcile it with the horror that came after. Carmen was 36 years old, a single mother of two boys who drove nights while they slept at her mother's house. She pulled double shifts between her day job as a medical billing specialist and her nights behind the wheel because Los Angeles rent waited for no one. Her ex-husband's child support checks came when they came, which was rarely. She'd learned to be careful, to trust her gut, to keep a taser in her door pocket and pepper spray in her cup holder, to verify every passenger's name before unlocking the doors, to avoid eye contact with anyone who felt wrong. The man who climbed into her car outside a trendy coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard didn't feel wrong at all. Not at first. Not until she glanced at the app photo and then at his face in the rearview mirror. That's when the first cold stirring of fear awakened in her stomach. The photo showed a young Latino man in his 20s, round, friendly face, short black hair, a small scar above his left eyebrow. The face of Marcus Delgado, according to the app. 4.92 rating, 847 rides. But the man in her back seat was older, thinner, sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed too large for his face, skin that was pale in a way that seemed unhealthy, wrong, like he'd been kept somewhere without sunlight for too long. "Marcus?" Carmen asked. Her voice was steady despite the hammering of her heart. Her hand moved slowly toward the pepper spray in her cup holder. The man smiled. The smile made everything worse. Too wide, too many teeth, not reaching his eyes at all. "That's me. Sorry, the photo's old. I've lost some weight." It was plausible. It was reasonable. People changed, lost weight, aged, looked different from their profile pictures. Carmen saw it every night, passengers who bore only passing resemblance to the images on her screen. But something about this explanation felt rehearsed, practiced, like he'd given it many times before, to many drivers who had noticed the same discrepancy, asked the same question, and probably, like Carmen, had decided it wasn't worth the confrontation, wasn't worth the potential one-star review, wasn't worth the risk of being wrong. She pulled away from the curb. She followed the GPS toward the destination, an address in an industrial area near the port of Los Angeles that she didn't recognize. She told herself she was being paranoid, that not every unusual passenger was a threat, that she'd be fine. 5 minutes into the ride, the man started whispering into his phone. Not talking, whispering. His voice was so low that Carmen couldn't make out individual words. The car was quiet. She wasn't playing music. She was straining to hear without being obvious about it. The language wasn't Spanish or English or anything she recognized. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where a dozen languages were spoken on every block. This was something different, a rhythmic guttural sound that rose and fell like chanting, like prayer, like something that wasn't meant to be overheard. Carmen adjusted her rear-view mirror. She was trying to see what the man was doing. She caught him staring directly at her reflection. His eyes met hers in the mirror. He didn't look away, didn't pretend he hadn't been watching her, just kept those two large eyes fixed on her face, while his lips continued to move in that whispering rhythm. The smile returned, slow and deliberate, as if to say, "I know you're afraid." The destination was 40 minutes away, according to the GPS. 40 minutes of industrial parks and empty lots, and streets with no pedestrians and no witnesses. Carmen's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. She calculated her options. She could cancel the ride, but that would mean stopping the car. She didn't want to stop, didn't want to be stationary with this man in her back seat. She could claim she was feeling sick and needed to pull over, but the same problem applied. She could call 911, but what would she say? That her passenger's face didn't match his photo? That he was whispering in a language she didn't understand? They would think she was crazy. They would think she was racist. They would tell her to calm down and complete the ride and stop wasting their time. So Carmen kept driving, kept her eyes on the road, kept her hand near the pepper spray. She tried not to think about what might be waiting at the destination. Tried not to think about the stories she'd heard from other drivers, about passengers who weren't passengers at all, about cars found abandoned with blood on the seats, about women who simply disappeared and whose bodies were never found. The GPS led her deeper into the industrial district, past warehouses with loading docks and trucks parked in rows, past chain-link fences topped with razor wire, past buildings with no windows and no signs and no indication of what happened inside. Then the automated voice spoke. "In 500 feet, your destination will be on the right." Carmen looked ahead, a single warehouse, its loading dock lit by a buzzing fluorescent light. 3 men standing in a loose cluster beside the open bay door, watching her approach, their expressions unreadable from this distance, but she felt them in her bones, felt them in the primal part of her brain that recognized predators, that screamed danger. Carmen didn't slow down. She accelerated. She blew past the warehouse at 50 miles per hour. The man in her back seat lunged forward with a snarl of rage. His hand grabbed for her shoulder. His 2 long fingers caught the fabric of her jacket. She slammed on the brake so hard that he was thrown against the back of her seat. It gave her just enough time. She unlocked the door, shoved it open, fell out onto the asphalt. She rolled, scrambled to her feet. The pepper spray was in her hand as she ran toward the distant lights of a 24-hour gas station she'd passed half a mile back. She didn't look behind her. She didn't stop, not until she was inside the fluorescent brightness of the convenience store. An old man stood behind the counter, staring at her like she'd lost her mind. The police found her car abandoned 3 blocks from the warehouse. The doors were hanging open. The dash cam was still running, recording nothing but an empty interior and the faint sound of footsteps fading into the distance. The warehouse was raided 2 weeks later. It was based on Carmen's report and an ongoing investigation into human trafficking in the Los Angeles port area. What the police found inside made the national news. Restraints, cages, evidence of long-term captivity, DNA from nearly a dozen missing persons. Carmen's name was never mentioned. Her involvement was kept confidential at the request of the lead detective. He told her she was lucky to be alive, luckier than the others who had been lured to that same loading dock by passengers who knew exactly what they were doing. But the detail that haunted Carmen wasn't the warehouse, it wasn't the cages, it wasn't even the DNA evidence. It was what the police told her about the passenger who had almost delivered her to that place. Marcus Delgado, the real Marcus Delgado, had been dead for 2 years, killed in a car accident on the 405 freeway.
His identity had been stolen, used to create a rideshare account that had been active ever since, operated by someone who used the dead man's name and photo to request rides from female drivers during the late-night hours. Someone who whispered into a phone in a language that no analyst could identify when the police reviewed Carmen's dashcam footage. Someone who delivered those drivers to waiting associates, then vanished into the night to do it all again. The face of the man in Carmen's car, the real face captured clearly by her dashcam, matched no one in any database. It belonged to no one who had ever been documented as living. The last image on the footage was recorded just before the car was abandoned. It showed him standing in the middle of the empty street, looking directly into the camera with that too wide smile, waving goodbye, his fingers bent at angles that fingers shouldn't bend. Then he stepped sideways into a shadow that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide anything, and he disappeared completely. Carmen still drives sometimes, but only during the day, only on familiar routes. Every time she picks up a passenger, she checks the face against the photo 3 times before unlocking the doors, because she knows now that the dead don't always stay dead, that someone is always hunting in the spaces between the app and the reality, that the next passenger might be wearing a face that doesn't belong to them, might be whispering in a language that shouldn't exist, might be leading her toward a loading dock where other men are waiting in the dark.